Deep in the heart of 13th century Anatolia, in modern-day Turkey, lived two famous Sufi mystics and poets. The more prominent was, of course, Rumi. But there was another wise and preeminent voice flowing through people's homes, hearts, and minds, that of Yunus Emre. Yunus Emre was a 13th century Turkish folk poet and Sufi mystic who greatly influenced Turkish culture, literature, poetry, and philosophy. Some writers and scholars even regard him as the most important poet in Turkish history, as well as a key figure in Sufism. Rather than composing poetry in Persian or Farsi, which was the region's literary language during that time, he wrote mostly in Turkish, with his poems often dealing with divine love, human destiny, and reuniting with God or one's true essence. But aside from being a poet and wandering dervish, Yunus was also a popular preacher and man of the people. He called for social justice, equality, and other humanistic ideals, often coming at odds with those whom he deemed as oppressors of the common people. He believed that loving oneself, or ego, and seeking power, recognition, or wealth to enhance that self creates distance between us and the rest of our community, hardening our hearts and obscuring the divine love we have for God and all of humanity. Like many Sufis during his time, he believed that one had to annihilate their sense of self to reach God. Most of the Turkish legends describe how he became a dervish and found his spiritual path. One legend narrates the story of a young, poor, and starving Yunus collecting wild fruits from the forest. After toiling for days, he stops at the famous Sufi lodge of Hasi Bektas, a prominent Sufi mystic and poet. Yunus offers to trade Hasi Bektas his wild fruits in exchange for seeds. But the grand mystic offered his nafas, or breath of blessing, instead. Yunus refused, even though Hasi Bektas offered more nafas each time. On the way back to his village, however, Yunus realized that he had received more seeds than he could even carry, leading him to reflect on and acknowledge the spiritual supremacy of Hasi Bektas. When he returned back to the lodge to ask for a nafas, Hasi Bektas replied that he turned over Yunus's padlock to Taptak Emre, another Sufi mystic. Many scholars point to the rich symbolism in this legend. The wild fruit, for example, could represent the untrained mind and heart that needs to be exchanged in order to obtain a new life or to experience spiritual growth as represented by the seed. With reference to someone's padlock being given to someone else, there could be a symbolic interpretation that Yunus's guidance was handed over to Tapduk Emre. Another legend describes how Yunus Emre started out as a proud and egocentric Seljuk judge before encountering the wise and humble Tapduk Emre, who turned his world upside down and helped him become a dervish who could truly love God. By showing Yunus the way, Tapduk would eventually help him unlock the divinity within and reunite with Source. There are several interesting comparisons between Yunus Emre and his more famous contemporary, Rumi. These comparisons are probably due in part to the similarities in their life journey prior to becoming the beloved poets, mystics, and philosophers they are known to be today. Just as Rumi had Shams-i Tabriz, Yunus had Tapduk Emre, who humbled and inspired him to leave worldly pursuits behind in favor of acquiring real spiritual wisdom. Rumi was known to write his stories, songs, and poems for a well-educated group of urban Sufi mystics, almost exclusively in Persian. However, Yunus Emre was more itinerant, traveling and teaching among the rural poor in the Turkish language of the everyday folk. Yunus Emre even mentions in some of his poetry about attending one of Rumi's gatherings. There is an interesting story about this encounter between the two great Sufi mystics and their different poetic styles and approaches. When Rumi asked his contemporary what he thought of his masterpiece, the Masnavi, Yunus Emre is said to have replied, "Excellent, excellent, but I would have done it differently." Rumi was taken aback and asked how, to which Yunus Emre explained, "I would have written, I came from the eternal, clothed myself in flesh, and took the name Yunus." In this story, Rumi acknowledged that he would not have written such a long work as the Masnavi if he had Yunus's talents to make short and punchy truisms. One legend even states that Rumi said, "Whenever I arrived at a new spiritual height, there I found the footsteps left by that Turkish mystic, and I could never surpass him." Even though he is not as famous today as Rumi, Yunus Emre is still loved in many parts of the world. His poetry still touches the hearts of lovers, even 7 centuries later.